I never thought I'd say those words out loud. But that night, in our quiet little suburb, everything changed. The same neighbor who fined me for my lawn, the same man who called me out for leaving my trash bin out, was suddenly standing inside my living room. No knock, no warning. Just there, my son's eyes went wide. His tiny hand moved toward the wall, and when his finger hit that button, the sound that followed shook the entire neighborhood. And what happened next? You won't believe. Welcome back to HOA Chaos, where I share the true stories of control, revenge, and survival. Behind the white picket fences, my name is Daniel. I'm a single dad living in a suburban neighborhood that looks perfect from the outside. Fresh lawns, clean driveways, smiling neighbors. But behind that perfect picture hides an HOA that runs everything. And trust me, they don't just watch the rules. Sometimes, they cross the line. This is what happened when one of them broke into my home. The night started quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence where you can hear the hum of the street lamps, the ticking of the clock on the wall, even the faint sound of my neighbor's sprinkler system across the fence. I sat on the couch with the TV on low, my son asleep in his room. I should have felt safe. But something in me was uneasy. Like the air was heavier than usual. Maybe it was the HOA letters still stacked on the table. Bright red stamps. Urgent. Final notice. All because I planted the wrong flowers by the mailbox. Can you imagine? $30 in fines, just for tulips. I thought that was the worst the HOA could do to me. But that night, they proved me wrong. The door creaked. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't my imagination. I know the sound of my own front door. And that sound makes your blood freeze when you hear it at midnight. I turned my head, and there he was, my neighbor, HOA officer, rule enforcer, the same man who once measured my grass with a ruler inside my house, like he belonged there. His shoes were still damp from the lawn, leaving marks on my carpet. His eyes didn't even blink when he saw me staring. He whispered something I'll never forget. This property needs to be inspected. Can you believe it? Middle of the night, inside my home. And the excuse he gave me was an inspection. My throat went dry. I couldn't even form words. But my son, he was faster than me. I saw him standing in the hallway. His pajamas wrinkled, hair messy from sleep. He wasn't moving, just staring, his hand trembling near the wall. And then, that sound. The siren blasted so loud the walls shook. Red light flashed across the living room, across my neighbor's face. It made him look like a criminal, caught in the act, which he was. He shouted over the noise. "Stop! It's a mistake. The HOA allows me. I was checking a violation." A violation? At midnight? Inside my home? My son clung to me, his little hands digging into my arm. I tried to dial the police, but the alarm system had already called them. The clock ticked louder. Every second an eternity. My neighbor backed into the corner of my living room. He looked less like an officer, and more like a rat trapped in the kitchen. But still, his arrogance didn't leave. He started listing my violations. Trash can visible from the street. Fence paint 1 shade too light. Mailbox tilted 3 degrees off center. He shouted them like they were crimes. And maybe in his head, they were. But none of that explained why he was in my house. Why he had my door unlocked. Why his hand was shaking as he shoved a paper toward me. Yes, he had a letter, an HOA violation letter, in my living room, past midnight. My son asked me, "Dad, is he going to take our house away?" And my heart broke, because that's what the HOA does to you. They make you feel small, powerless, like they own you. The siren kept blaring. The neighbor's lights started turning on, curtains opened, faces peeking out, everyone hearing the alarm, everyone seeing the red flashes, and me, standing there, watching the man who tried to own us, trapped, caught. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream, because there was irony in it. The man who fined me for leaving a toy in the yard was about to be dragged out of my house like a burglar. The seconds dragged on. My son buried his face in my shirt, and I realized something terrifying. If my boy hadn't hit that button, what would have happened? Would the neighbor have kept walking deeper into my home, room to room, claiming every corner as inspection? Would he have found something to fine me for? Or worse? I still hear that siren in my dreams, loud, endless, echoing in my chest. But that sound saved us. That sound turned my son into the hero of the night. The police were on their way. The neighbors were whispering outside, and the man who once smiled at the HOA meetings now looked like he wanted the ground to swallow him whole. But the story doesn't end there, because what the officers found on him was darker than any violation letter. The siren was still howling. It felt like the walls were vibrating with every pulse of that red light. My son clung to me tighter, his small hands digging into my side. I whispered that it would be okay, but I wasn't sure if I believed it, because standing in my living room was the one man who controlled our neighborhood, the man everyone feared at the HOA meetings, the one who fined old Mrs. Green for having the wrong shade of Christmas lights, the one who forced a veteran to repaint his porch 3 times because the beige wasn't beige enough. That same man was cornered in my house, like a thief, and still, his voice was full of arrogance. "You don't understand," he shouted over the siren. "I'm allowed to do this. I was given the right. Inspection authority. Violation checks. Violation checks. At midnight?" I wanted to laugh, but the rage inside me was boiling too hot to find humor. He clutched that paper in his hand like it was a badge, like a weapon. He waved it in front of me. The edges crumpled from his sweaty grip, and all I could see were those bold HOA letters stamped across the top. Another violation notice. Inside my living room. At midnight, I shouted back at him, my voice cracking from fear and fury. "You broke into my home. My son is terrified. What kind of inspection is this?" But he didn't flinch. He leaned in closer, his eyes dark and unblinking. "This neighborhood has rules, and rules must be enforced." That line, it echoed in my head, because that's exactly how the HOA worked. Not with kindness, not with community, but with fear, control, punishment. The siren was still wailing when the first knock hit the door, then another, then the sound of boots on the porch. Police. Finally, my son's grip loosened just a little. I squeezed his shoulder, whispered that help was here, but my neighbor, he wasn't done. As the door burst open and 2 officers rushed in, he tried to spin it. He pointed at me like I was the criminal. "This man is dangerous," he shouted. "I was conducting an HOA inspection and he set off the alarm. He's violent, unstable." The audacity of it nearly made me choke. Me, unstable. Me. The man standing barefoot in his pajamas, holding his son, while he stood inside my home at midnight with a stolen key. The officers didn't buy it right away. They scanned the room. Their flashlights cut it. Through the red glow, they saw the letter in his hand. They saw my trembling boy, and then one of them asked the question that changed everything. "Sir, how did you enter this home?" The neighbor froze, his mouth opened, but no words came out, and that's when the second officer noticed something, the faint glint of metal in his pocket. "Empty your pockets," he ordered. My heart pounded so loud I thought the siren was echoing it, slowly, reluctantly. My neighbor reached into his pocket and pulled it out. A key, not mine, not one I had ever seen. The officer's eyes narrowed. "This isn't your property. How do you have a key?" And there it was, the crack in his perfect armor. He stammered, stumbled over his excuses. It's the HOA's master key. I needed it for inspections. Emergencies only. Board approval." But the officers didn't look convinced, and neither was I. Because if it was really for emergencies, why use it on me? Why use it in the middle of the night? Why carry it secretly instead of logging it with the HOA office? My son whispered, "Dad, he was gonna hurt us." And in that moment, I believed him. The officers took the key. They wrote something down in their notepads. One of them asked me to explain everything, from the first creak of the door to the moment my boy hit the alarm. I told them everything, my voice shaking, my son's head buried against my chest, and while I spoke, my neighbor stood there, silent, his confidence draining with every word, the mask of power slipping away. The police didn't arrest him right there. Not yet, but they told him to leave. They told him he was under investigation for unlawful entry, and they told him if he tried to step foot on my property again, there would be handcuffs. He left, red-faced, muttering about misunderstandings and false accusations. But I knew better, and so did everyone watching from their windows. The neighborhood had seen him dragged out by the police. The whispers would spread like wildfire. The siren finally stopped. The silence felt heavier than the nose. "Ease," my son looked up at me, eyes still wide. "Dad, is he going to come back?" And I didn't know what to say, because here's the truth. The HOA is like a snake. Cut off one head, another grows, expose one secret, and 10 more crawl out of the shadows. The next day, the letters didn't stop. In fact, they multiplied. One for failing to maintain the front yard, one for improper alarm installation. One even claimed my house's color was now non-compliant. It was retaliation, pure calculated. HOA revenge, but I didn't back down. I attended the next board meeting. I stood in front of them all, the smug faces, the fake smiles, the whispers behind clipped manicures and expensive watches, and I told them what happened. I told them their officer had broken into my house with a master key. I told them the police had taken evidence. I told them the neighborhood saw everything. And do you know what they did? They laughed. They said I was exaggerating. They said my alarm story was dramatic. They even tried to fine me for causing a public disturbance. The room spun with rage, but I kept my composure because I realized something that night at the meeting. They weren't invincible. They were afraid. The way their eyes darted, the way they shuffled papers to avoid my stare, the way one of them whispered about the key, just loud enough for me to hear. There was more to this story, more than just a break-in, more than just one corrupt neighbor. There was a secret inside that HOA, and now I wanted to uncover it. The boardroom laughter still rings in my ears. Cold, sharp, echoing through the fluorescent lights above. It wasn't the laughter of neighbors. It was the laughter of people who thought they could never be touched. I stood there, holding my son's hand, my palms sweaty, and I realized they weren't scared of me at all. At least, not yet. But when I mentioned the master key, that changed things. The room went quiet for a second. Too quiet. The president of the HOA, Mrs. Carmichael, tapped her pen on the table. Her lips curled into a smile, but her eyes flickered, nervous, calculating. "Mr. Daniel," she said smoothly, "you must be mistaken. There is no master key, not in this community." The other board members nodded quickly, too quickly, their heads bobbing like puppets on strings. One of them dropped his coffee cup. Another shuffled papers like his life depended on it. That's when I knew. The key was real, and the secret was bigger than my single break-in. I leaned forward. "You can lie to me, but the police have the key now. They know what he did." Mrs. Carmichael didn't flinch. She just smiled wider. "Then I'm sure they'll return it soon. After all, nothing unlawful has occurred." Unlawful. That word rolled in my mind like poison, because what's more unlawful than breaking into someone's home? What's more unlawful than carrying keys to every door on this street? The board tried to move on. Next agenda item, mailbox heights, fence colors, noise ordinances. But I wasn't listening anymore. I was watching them. The twitch in Mrs. Carmichael's jaw, the way Mr. Hughes wouldn't meet my eyes, the whispered, "We need to talk after this." I caught from 2 members in the corner. They were hiding something, and I was about to find out what. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house felt smaller, darker. Every creak of the floorboards made my skin crawl. Every rustle of the wind made me think of that neighbor, of his face lit red by the siren. My son tried to be brave, but I heard him crying in his room. He asked if the bad man with the key would come back, and I told him no. But inside, I wasn't so sure, so I stayed awake. I sat by the window, staring out into the cul-de-sac, and that's when I noticed it. A car, parked too long across the street, headlights off, engine running soft. It wasn't a neighbor's car. It was black, tinted windows. No HOA sticker on the windshield. It sat there for hours. And when I finally stepped onto my porch, it drove away slowly. No plates visible. The HOA wasn't just hiding something. They were watching me. The next day, I decided to dig deeper. I started with the neighbors, the ones who had lived here longer than me. Old Mrs. Green, the one fined for her Christmas lights. She hesitated when I asked her about the HOA. Her voice dropped low. almost a whisper. "They've had that key for years. Don't let them fool you. They say it's for emergencies. But I know better." She told me about the time her medicine went missing. The time her garage door was mysteriously unlocked. The time she swore someone was in her home when she wasn't there. I asked why she never said anything. Her eyes filled with tears. "Because last time I complained, they doubled my dues and threatened foreclosure." Foreclosure over Christmas lights? That was no mistake. That was a weapon I spoke to others too. The single mom down the street, the retired veteran with the beige porch, the couple who never attended meetings anymore. Each had a story. Each whispered about missing items, strange noises, sudden finds that came right after they spoke against the board. The pieces clicked. The HOA wasn't just petty. They were using that master key to spy, to intimidate, to control. I needed proof, so I did something risky. That night, I stayed awake again. But this time, I set up my phone camera by the front door, motion activated, pointed straight at the lock, and then I waited. Hours passed. The house was silent except for my son's breathing, and just when my eyes were about to close, I heard it. The faintest click of metal against metal, the knob turning slowly, my blood turned to ice through the peephole. I saw him. Not the same neighbor from before, another one, a different board member. He held a key, slid it into my lock, and slowly, carefully, began to open my door. My camera caught it all. Every second, I wanted to scream, to charge the door. But instead I waited. The siren was armed. The second the door opened, it blasted again. The red light flooded the entryway. The man jumped back like he'd been burned. He cursed under his breath, ran back into the night. But my phone didn't miss it. I had him on video, clear as day the next morning. I went straight to the police. I showed them the footage, the key, everything. They didn't laugh. They didn't call me unstable. They took it seriously. And that's when they told me something chilling. "You're not the first," the officer said quietly. "There have been other complaints, other calls. But every time we investigate, the HOA lawyers step in and shut it down." Lawyers. Of course, the HOA didn't just have rules. They had shields, money, power, connections. But this time, I had evidence they couldn't bury. The officer promised to investigate, but he warned me, "Be careful. They won't like that you have this video." He was right, because that same evening, a letter arrived at my door. Not a normal violation letter. This one was different. Bold, thick font. Notice of community harm. It accused me of spreading lies, of causing unrest in the neighborhood, of attacking the integrity of the board. And at the bottom, the threat was clear. If I didn't withdraw my complaint, the HOA would begin foreclosure proceedings against my home, all because I caught them breaking in. I stared at that letter, my son playing quietly in the corner, and I felt the weight of it all. It wasn't just my house at risk. It was our safety, our peace, our future. But one thing was clear now. This wasn't about tulips or fences or mailboxes. This was about control, about power. And I wasn't going to back down, because if I did, they'd win, and my son would grow up thinking the bad guys always win. I folded the letter, placed it on the table beside the others, and whispered to myself, "Not this time." The letter sat on my kitchen table, bold black words staring at me like a threat carved into stone. Notice of community harm. I read it once, twice, 10 times. Each sentence felt like a dagger. Spreading lies, causing unrest, attacking the integrity of the board. It didn't sound like a violation letter anymore. It sounded like a lawsuit. And the worst part, they weren't just coming for my lawn or my mailbox. They were coming for my home itself, foreclosure. The word made my chest tighten. Take my house away? Because I caught them on camera? My son looked at me with wide eyes. "Dad, what does it mean?" I forced a smile, but inside I was breaking. "It means the bad people are scared, buddy. Scared of the truth." The next day, things got worse. I walked outside to grab the paper and froze. Spray paint across my garage door. Rule breaker. In dripping red letters, the neighbors peeked from behind curtains. But no one stepped outside. Not one person offered help. And I realized the HOA had turned them against me too. Witty. Then I drove to work. My tires felt off. By lunch, one was flat, nails scattered across my driveway. This wasn't coincidence anymore. This was war. I called the police again. Showed them the vandalism, showed them the letter. The officer sighed, scribbled notes, but his voice was tired. "We'll file a report. But you need to understand, these HOAs have lawyers stacked to the ceiling. They'll bury you in paperwork if you fight." I clenched my fists. "So you're telling me they can break into homes, vandalize property, threaten foreclosure, and nothing happens?" He looked at me with pity. "I'm telling you, they'll make your life hell." I already knew that. I was living it. That night, another meeting notice slid under my door, an emergency board session. They wanted me there, and I knew why. They were going to try to humiliate me, shut me up in front of everyone, but I wasn't going to give them that victory. I decided to go. Not for me, but for my son, because if I showed fear, they'd never stop. The room was packed. Neighbors lined the walls, whispering, staring, some sympathetic, most scared. The board sat in their usual spots, Mrs. Carmichael at the center, smiling her sharp smile. To her left, the man who broke into my home. To her right, the one caught on my camera, both pretending they were innocent, both avoiding my eyes. The meeting started with the usual nonsense: fines, fences, lawn heights, then my name. "Mr. Daniel," Mrs. Carmichael purred, "you've caused quite a stir in our community. Accusations, lies, false alarms. Care to explain yourself?" I stood, my voice shook, but I spoke anyway. "My son pressed that alarm because your officer entered my house at midnight. I have the footage. The police have the key, and I'm not the only one. Other neighbors have told me the same stories. You're abusing your power." Gasps echoed through the room, whispers rippled like a wave, but the board didn't flinch. Mrs. Carmichael raised her hand for silence. "Mr. Daniel is confused. Our board has never abused authority. Any footage he claims to have is taken out of context. The alarm? A mistake. The key? A tool for emergencies only." Lies bold, straight to my face. I pulled out my phone, played the video, the board member at my door, sliding the key in. Caught in red light, the room erupted, neighbors pointing, whispering, some even shouting. But the board? They sat stone-faced, like the video didn't matter. Mrs. Carmichael leaned forward. "If you continue this slander, we will pursue foreclosure immediately. Consider this your final warning." I stared at her, at the smug faces beside her, at the neighbors who wanted to speak up, but stayed silent out of fear. That's when I realized something chilling. It wasn't about truth, it was about power. They didn't care what I proved, they only cared that I challenged them. That night, I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. Every sound outside felt like footsteps. Every knock at the door felt like another threat. And then it came. A letter in my mailbox, but not from the HOA, no return address, just a single sheet of paper, typed words. "They've done this before. Look into Lot 47. Lot 47. I didn't know the number offhand, but when I checked the neighborhood map, my stomach dropped. Lot 47 was the quiet house at the end of the cul-de-sac, the one that had been empty for months. No curtains, no cars, no lights, or at least, that's what I thought. The next day, I walked past it. The grass was cut, the porch swept clean, but no one had ever seen the owners. I asked a neighbor about it. She whispered, "There used to be a family there, until they crossed the HOA. Then one day, gone. House repossessed. Files sealed. No one talks about it." A chill ran down my spine. Was this my future? Was this what they were planning for me and my son? That night, I did something reckless. I snuck to Lot 47. The lock on the side gate was rusted. Too easy to use. Oh, break. I slipped into the backyard. No lights. No sound. I pressed my face to the window and saw boxes stacked high. HOA files. Violation records. Photos. Photos of neighbors' homes. Photos taken from inside. Living rooms. Kitchens. Bedrooms. My chest tightened. They weren't just enforcing rules. They were watching us. All of us. I stumbled back, heart pounding, and nearly screamed when a voice cut through the dark. "What are you doing here?" A flashlight beam blinded me. It wasn't a cop. It wasn't a neighbor. It was another board member. I ran, back through the gate, across the yard, down the street. My lungs burned. My legs shook, but I didn't stop until I was inside my own house. Door bolted shut. My son looked at me confused. "Dad, why are you breathing so fast?" I pulled him close. "Because we're in more danger than I thought." I didn't tell him about the photos. I didn't tell him what I saw in Lot 47. But I knew one thing. The HOA wasn't just petty. They were dangerous. I couldn't sleep after that night at Lot 47. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those boxes, photos of living rooms, kitchens, bedrooms, private spaces that no neighbor ever invited the board into. The HOA wasn't just enforcing rules, they were spying. They had been inside more homes than anyone realized. I sat by the window, watching the cul-de-sac. Every car that passed made my heart pound. Every shadow looked like another board member creeping up to my door. My son asked me in the morning, "Dad, why don't you sleep anymore?" I told him the truth, but in soft words. Because the people who should protect us are the ones hurting us. That day I tried to act normal. I mowed the lawn, waved at the mailman, even walked my son to the bus stop. But everywhere I went, eyes followed me, neighbors staring, whispering. Some looked guilty, some looked angry, but none of them spoke up. I realized the HOA had already poisoned the well. They told everyone I was the problem, that I was dangerous, that I was spreading lies. And in a neighborhood like ours, perception is everything. Once the board turns people against you, you're finished. I decided to confront Mrs. Carmichael directly. I walked to her house in the evening. Perfect garden, perfect shutters, perfect porch light glowing like a spotlight. She opened the door before I even knocked, like she was expecting me. Her smile was sharp as glass. "Mr. Daniel, I was wondering when you'd come." I clenched my fists. "You've been spying on families. I saw the files in Lot 47. I have video of your board breaking into my house. You can't deny it anymore." Her eyes didn't blink. She just leaned closer, her perfume sharp in the night air. "You think you're the first one to challenge us?" she whispered. "Families come and go. Houses change hands. But the HOA remains. Always." The way she said it, calm, certain, it chilled me more than shouting ever could. Then she added, "Be careful, Daniel. You have a son. It would be a shame if he grew up without stability." It wasn't a threat, it was a promise. That night, the noises started again. Not the usual creaks of the house settling. No, this was different. Tapping on the windows, the crunch of footsteps in the gravel outside, shadows moving past the curtains. I rushed to the front door, yanked it open. Nothing. Silence. But when I turned back, another letter slid under the door while I was standing right there. This one was handwritten, uneven letters. Black ink pressed too hard into the paper. "Stop digging, or we dig into you." My son found it first. He asked me what it meant. I told him it was nothing. But inside, my rage burned hotter than fear. The next morning, I called the officer handling my case. I told him about the files at Lot 47. I begged him to get a warrant, to search the house, to expose them. But his voice was heavy, tired. Without a formal complaint from multiple residents, our hands are tied. And you know the HOA's lawyers will fight tooth and nail. I slammed the phone down. Multiple residents? Fine. If that's what it took, I'd get them. I knocked on doors. I spoke to neighbors. I reminded them of their own stories, the missing medicine, the garage doors, the sudden finds. Some shut the door in my face. Some whispered that they were scared, but a few, just a few, nodded. Old Mrs. Green, the single mom, the retired veteran, they agreed to stand with me. They agreed to tell the police what they knew for the first time. I felt hope. But the HOA struck first. That evening, I came home to flashing lights. Police cars lined the street. My stomach dropped. I thought they had raided Lot 47. I thought justice was finally happening. But no, the officers were at my door, and Mrs. Carmichael was standing in my yard. Crocodile tears streaming down her face, she pointed at me. "That's him. He threatened me. He vandalized HOA property." My jaw dropped. "What?" That's a lie. But the officer stepped closer. Sir, we need to ask you some questions. They searched my car, and what they found made my blood run cold. A can of red spray paint, the same color used to vandalize my garage days earlier, but it wasn't mine. I had never bought spray paint in my life. Someone had planted it. The HOA wasn't just fighting back, they were framing me. I explained everything. The sirens, the key, the video, the letters, the files at Lot 47. The officers listened, but their eyes showed doubt. Mrs. C. Michael kept crying, her voice shaking. He's unstable. He's dangerous. He's turning the neighborhood against us. I wanted to scream. I wanted to rip the mask off her face and show the world who she really was. But all I could do was plead, and luckily, one officer seemed to believe me. He whispered quietly as they left, "Keep your head down. We'll keep digging." That night, I held my son tighter than ever. He asked me if we were going to lose our house, and I didn't know how to answer, because the truth was, we might. The HOA had money. Lawyers, influence, they could twist the truth until it broke, and I was just one man, fighting an army, but I also had something they didn't. The truth. The video. The neighbors slowly waking up to reality, and maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The next day, I returned to Lot 47, but this time, the boxes were gone, the windows empty, the rooms stripped clean. They had moved everything overnight. I stood there staring through the glass, and I knew it wasn't over. This was only the beginning, because if they were willing to break into homes, plant evidence, erase files, what else were they hiding? How deep did this go? After Lot 47 was cleared out, after the spray paint frame-up, I knew the HOA wasn't just fighting me, they were trying to erase every trace of what they'd done. But here's the thing about people drunk on power. They always make mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes become the weapon that takes them down. I spent nights digging through the HOA handbook, page after page, rule after rule, tiny words printed in dull black ink. But behind those words, I saw patterns, contradictions, loopholes. For years, they had used this book like a sword, cutting down anyone who dared to resist. But what if I turned it back on them? That's when the idea hit me. Revenge by compliance. I started small. Trash cans must be removed within 30 minutes of collection? Fine. I set a timer. Dragged mine in exactly 29 minutes after pickup, every single week. Lawn height must be between 2.5 and 3 inches. Fine. I bought a ruler, measured every blade until it was perfect. Mailbox tilt no more than 2 degrees. Done. I hired a contractor to level it exactly to spec. They came to inspect, and for the first time, they had nothing to fine me for. Their faces twisted with frustration, because control only works if you give them something to grab onto, and I gave them nothing. But I didn't stop there. I noticed other contradictions in their own rules, like how their meetings were supposed to be open to all residents. But half the time they locked the doors early, or how every budget decision was supposed to be shared publicly, but no one had seen the financials in years. So I started asking questions, loud questions, at meetings, on record. Where are the financial statements? Why was the door locked at last month's meeting? Who approved the purchase of security cameras? They squirmed in their seats. Mrs. Carmichael's fake smile started to crack. The whispers grew louder, not just mine anymore, but other neighbors, finally finding courage. And then, something unexpected happened. One night I got a knock at my door. It was the retired veteran, Mr. Lawson, the one who'd been forced to repaint his porch. He stepped inside, handed me a folder. Inside were copies of old HOA records, receipts, notes, letters. "Keep these safe," he said quietly. "They don't know I kept them. But if you want to take them down, this is your chance." My hand shook as I flipped through the pages. Payments to contractors that didn't exist, funds missing from the neighborhood account, special assessments collected, but never used for repairs, fraud, plain as day. The next board meeting was different. The room was packed, more neighbors than I'd ever seen. Whispers of Lot 47 still floated around. Rumors of secret keys spread like wildfire. Mrs. Carmichael tried to keep order. She banged her gavel, smiled her sharp smile. "Let's begin." But I didn't let her. I stood, held up the folder, and dropped it on the table with a loud thud. "Tell them," I said. "Tell everyone where this money went." Gasps filled the room. The board froze, papers shuffled, eyes darted, throats cleared. I opened the folder, read aloud the receipts, the fake contracts, the missing funds. Neighbors shouted, "Is this true? Where's our money? You lied to us." The board tried to drown me out. "Lies," Mrs. Carmichael shouted. "Fabrications. He's spreading chaos." But the neighbors weren't listening anymore. They were listening to me. The next days were chaos. Whispers turned into arguments. Arguments turned into demands. The neighborhood was no longer united in fear. It was divided in outrage. Letters poured into the HOA office, calls for audits, calls for resignations, even calls for dissolution of the board itself. And for once, it wasn't just me against them. It was us. But the HOA didn't go down easy. I started receiving anonymous emails, threats, drop it, or lose everything. Think of your son. One morning, I found a dead rat in my mailbox. Another time, a brick through my window with a note taped to it. Final warning. They were desperate, cornered, like an animal about to strike. But I wasn't backing down. I took the folder to the police. This time, they couldn't ignore it. Fraud was bigger than violation letters. Fraud meant crimes. Crimes meant consequences. The officer I'd spoken to before looked at me differently now, more serious. "Daniel, this could be enough, but you need to be careful. They'll try to bury you before this gets out." I nodded, because I already knew the war had reached its final stage. That night, my son asked me something that broke my heart. "Dad, will we have to leave our house?" I looked at him, at the boy who had slammed the panic alarm and saved us that first night, at the boy who didn't ask for this war but was dragged into it anyway, and I promised him, "Nobody, this is our home, and no one, not even them, can take it from us." But inside, I wasn't sure, because I knew the HOA's next move would be their deadliest yet. And I was right. 2 days later, I came home to find a notice taped to my door. Not a violation, not a threat, a summons. The HOA was suing me for defamation. They claimed my words, my evidence, my questions, had damaged the reputation of the community. They weren't just trying to fine me. They were trying to destroy me in court. I stared at that paper, the words swimming in front of my eyes, my son tugging at my sleeve asking if everything was okay, and I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about everyone who ever suffered under their control. The summons sat heavy in my hands. A piece of paper. But it felt like a weapon. The HOA had thrown their final punch. A lawsuit. Defamation. They wanted to drag me into court and bury me in legal fees. I stared at the words until they blurred. Damages to the reputation of the community. False statements intended to incite unrest. They weren't just suing me. They were trying to erase me. My son looked at me with wide eyes. "Dad, are we in trouble?" And I forced myself to smile. "Nobody. We're not in trouble. They are." But inside, I wasn't sure. The days leading up to the trial felt like walking through fire. Letters from the HOA piled up. Neighbors whispered even louder. Some supported me. Others avoided me like I was toxic. And the board? They acted calm, confident, like they'd already won. Mrs. Carmichael even waved at me when I drove past her house, her smile sharp as ever. But I could see it now. That smile wasn't confidence. It was fear wearing lipstick. The courtroom was colder than I expected, the kind of cold that sinks into your bones. The judge sat high above us, expressionless. The HOA lawyers lined their table with stacks of binders and papers. They looked like vultures in suits. I sat on the other side, alone. Except for the small folder in front of me, the folder Mr. Lawson had given me, the receipts, the fake contracts, the missing funds. It didn't look like much, but I knew it was everything. The HOA's lawyer spoke first, his voice smooth, rehearsed. He painted me as a troublemaker, a man obsessed with control, a father who scared the neighborhood with wild stories and false alarms. He called me paranoid, unstable, a danger to the peaceful spirit of the community. Neighbors shifted in their seats behind me, some nodding, some shaking their heads. Then it was my turn. I stood, my knees trembling, my voice unsteady at first, But then I remembered the siren, the red light flashing across my son's terrified face, and the words came out stronger. I told the judge about the night of the break-in, the master key, the vandalism, the threats, the letter that said, "Stop digging or we dig into you." I held up my phone, showed the video, the board member caught at my door, sliding the key into the lock, the siren blasting, the courtroom gasped, even the judge's eyebrows lifted slightly. The HOA's lawyer tried to object, taken out of context, fabricated. But I wasn't done. I opened the folder, pulled out the receipts, the payments to phantom contractors, the missing funds. "Where did this money go?" I asked. "Who approved these payments?" The board squirmed. Mrs. Carmichael kept her fake smile, but sweat beaded at her temple. The lawyer objected again. "Irrelevant to defamation." But the judge leaned forward. "On the contrary, if these documents are authentic, they are highly relevant." And that's when I saw it, the first crack in the armor. Days of testimony followed. Neighbors came forward. Old Mrs. Green spoke about her missing medicine. Mr. Lawson told the story of repainting his porch 3 times. The single mom explained how she was fined for her kids' toys left in the yard, one by one. Their voices joined mine, one by one. The board's lies unraveled. The HOA tried to fight back. They claimed the master key was for emergencies. They claimed Lot 47 was storage for community records. They claimed the vandalism was coincidental. But the evidence spoke louder than their excuses. On the final day, Mrs. Carmichael took the stand, her voice calm, her smile fixed. She said I was dangerous, that I hated rules, that I wanted chaos in a community that was supposed to be safe. But when I asked her one question, the smile slipped. "Where is the money, Mrs. Carmichael?" The courtroom went silent. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her eyes darted to her lawyer, to the other board members, to the judge. And in that silence, everyone saw the truth. The judge's ruling came swiftly. The HOA's case against me, dismissed. The defamation claim, thrown out. But that wasn't all. The judge ordered a full audit of the HOA's finances and referred the evidence to the district attorney's office. Mrs. Carmichael's face turned white. The board members whispered frantically, and I, for the first time in months, felt like I could breathe. The aftermath was chaos. The audit uncovered years of fraud, money siphoned into fake projects, board members pocketing funds, even hush payments to keep complaints quiet. Resignations followed, arrests too. The once feared board crumbled piece by piece. The neighborhood changed. People started speaking up. The fear that had ruled every cul-de-sac vanished overnight. And me? I was just a dad, standing on my porch with my son, watching the signs of real freedom for the first time. But Vix, Tori came with scars. My windows were still cracked from the brick, my garage door still stained with spray paint, and every creak in the night still made me jump. My son asked me one last time, "Dad, are the bad people gone for good?" I hugged him tight and whispered, "For now, buddy. For now." Because deep down, I knew power never disappears. It just waits. And one day, somewhere, another HOA will try the same game. But maybe, just maybe, more people will stand up the way I did. And now I want to hear from you. If you finally exposed your corrupt HOA and saw them crumble, would you stay in that neighborhood to rebuild it? Or would you pack up and leave forever, never looking back?